Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I had been working double shifts at the construction site for the past 3 weeks. Between the early morning starts and the blazing heat, I was completely drained. My wife had been patient with my grumpy mood and lack of energy, so when I finally got a day off, I promised her we'd go somewhere nice for lunch. We decided on this little Spanish restaurant downtown that we'd been wanting to try. It had good reviews online and the photos of their outdoor patio looked perfect. My wife loves trying new places, and I figured some good food and drinks in a relaxed setting would help me unwind. The restaurant was busier than expected for a Tuesday afternoon, but we managed to get a table on the patio. The sun was beating down pretty hard, but there were umbrellas and a nice breeze. My wife was already browsing the drink menu while I was still looking at the food options. My wife said she wanted to try their sangria because the description mentioned fresh fruit and everything. I told her it sounded good and that she deserved something special after putting up with me these past few weeks. She laughed and said I'd been working so hard and that we should just relax and enjoy ourselves. When our waitress came over, she was friendly and seemed to know the menu well. My wife ordered the sangria right away, and I got a beer. The waitress mentioned that the sangria was one of their specialties and would be out shortly. About 10 minutes later, we could see our waitress coming from the bar area carrying a tray. There was this gorgeous glass pitcher filled with red wine, chunks of fresh fruit, and what looked like sparkling water. Next to it was my beer. My wife's eyes lit up when she saw it approaching our table. But before the waitress could reach us, this woman, at a table near the entrance, suddenly stood up and intercepted her. She told the waitress that it was a nice-looking drink and that she would like it. The waitress looked a bit confused but stayed polite. She thanked the woman and explained that this was their sangria, saying she'd be happy to get her one after delivering this one to our table first. The woman said no, she wanted that exact drink the waitress was carrying. The waitress paused, clearly not understanding, and asked what she meant. The woman clarified that she wanted that exact drink the waitress was holding and told her to give it to her. My wife and I exchanged looks. We could hear everything from our table, which was only about 15 feet away. The waitress explained that this pitcher was ordered by my wife and me, but she'd be more than happy to have the bartender make a fresh one for the demanding woman. The woman asked why she should have to wait when there was a perfectly good drink right there, pointing out that we hadn't even touched it yet. The waitress looked like she was trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. She explained that we had ordered it first and were paying for it, adding that this was how restaurants work. The woman called this ridiculous and said she was a customer too, claiming that customer service meant giving customers what they want. At this point, I stood up and walked over. My wife tried to grab my arm, but I was already moving. I asked if there was a problem. The woman said yes, there was. She complained that our waitress was being unreasonable and that she had simply asked for that drink, but the waitress was refusing to give it to her. I explained that it wasn't hers because my wife had ordered it 20 minutes ago. The woman insisted she was ordering it now and said that first come, first served didn't apply when the drink was just sitting there. I looked at the waitress, who seemed relieved that someone was backing her up. I told the woman that this wasn't how any of this worked and that she couldn't just take someone else's order because she decided she wanted it. The woman argued that she had every right as a paying customer to get what she wanted and called it terrible service. The restaurant manager had noticed the commotion and came over asking if everything was all right. The woman immediately turned to him with this huge smile, like she'd been waiting for backup. She told him that finally someone with authority was there. She complained that the waitress was refusing to serve her and that I was being very aggressive toward her. I almost laughed at the aggressive comment, but the manager looked between all of us calmly and asked what the issue was. The waitress explained that this lady wanted her to give up the sangria that was ordered by my wife and me. She said that when she explained she could make a fresh one, the woman insisted on taking ours. The woman said she didn't want to wait and pointed out that The drink was just sitting there with nobody drinking it yet. The manager nodded slowly and told the woman he understood she'd like to try their sangria, but they couldn't give her another customer's order. However, since there seemed to be some confusion, he offered to have the bartender prioritize her sangria and have it out in just a few minutes. The woman asked incredulously about having to wait a few minutes and called it unacceptable. She declared that in any decent establishment, the customer comes first. The manager agreed that the customer does come first, which was exactly why they needed to serve the customers who ordered first. He asked if she'd like him to put in that sangria order for her. The woman looked around like she was expecting other people to support her. The other diners were all staring, but not in a sympathetic way. She claimed this was discrimination and threatened to leave reviews everywhere about how poorly they treat their customers. I told her she wasn't being discriminated against, but was just being told no, which apparently didn't happen to her very often. The woman snapped that she didn't have to listen to this from some construction worker who probably didn't even understand fine dining. That comment made me smile. I agreed that I didn't understand fine dining but said I did understand basic human decency, which seemed to be something she missed out on. The manager stepped in before the woman could respond. He told her he was going to have to ask her to return to her table or leave the restaurant because she was disrupting other customers' dining experience. The woman said fine, she didn't want to eat at this horrible place anyway, and threatened that they'd be hearing from corporate. She walked off, grabbing her purse from her table and leaving money scattered on it. The whole patio watched her go. The manager apologized to us and comped our entire meal. The waitress was so grateful that she kept checking on us throughout lunch. My wife finally got her sangria, and it was as delicious as it looked. I'm 32, work a demanding job, and the gym is basically my sanctuary. When dealing with clients and meetings all day, I need that hour and a half to completely zone out and focus on myself. I always go after work around 7 p.m. because it's when I can decompress from the day. My routine is pretty simple. I smoke a little before heading in because it helps me get in the zone and really focus on my form. I put in my headphones, nod to the staff, and get to work. I'm not there to socialize. I'm there to lift, stretch, and clear my head. The gym has this unspoken rule that most people follow. If someone has headphones in, you'll leave them alone unless it's absolutely necessary. This whole mess started last week after my workout. I usually grab tacos from this food cart right outside the gym because the owner makes the best carnitas in the neighborhood. I was standing there waiting for my order when this guy approached me. He looked to be in his 40s, average height, wearing gym clothes. He told me he recognized me from the gym and that he'd seen me around. I pulled out one earbud because I couldn't really hear him clearly and gave him a brief acknowledgement. He then suggested we walk back to the gym together since we were both heading that way. I really didn't want to, but he seemed harmless enough and we were literally going to the same building. I figured I'd make small talk for the 2-minute walk, and that would be it. I agreed reluctantly. The whole walk, he kept talking about different workout routines and asking me about my schedule. I gave short answers and tried to signal that I wasn't really interested in a long conversation. When we got to the gym parking lot, I wanted that to be the end of it. I told him I'd see him around, and he responded enthusiastically that we should definitely work out together sometime. I just gave a non-committal smile and headed to my car. I honestly hoped he'd forget about the whole interaction, but of course he didn't. A few days later, I was on the foam roller area doing my usual post-workout stretching. I had my headphones in and was completely focused on working out this knot in my shoulder. Out of nowhere, this guy appears and squats down right next to me. He's trying to make eye contact and gesturing for a fist bump. I reluctantly acknowledged him with a quick nod, but completely ignored the fist bump attempt. I kept my headphones in and avoided looking in his direction for the rest of my time there. Maybe he'd get the hint. Today was the final straw. I was doing leg lifts on the mat, completely in my zone, when I saw him walk into the gym. I immediately looked away and focused extra hard on my workout, hoping he'd just do his own thing. For about 20 minutes, it seemed like he was respecting my space. I started to relax. Then, right in the middle of my set, He walks over and extends his hand for another fist bump. I was honestly shocked at the audacity. I pulled out my headphone and told him directly that I didn't want to do this. I explained that I was there to work out, not to make friends, and that I didn't want to talk to him. His face immediately changed. He looked offended and told me he was just saying hi and trying to be friendly. I repeated that I understood but asked him not to bother me anymore. I put my headphone back in and continued my workout. He stood there for a few more seconds looking confused, then walked away. I could feel other people looking over, probably thinking I was being unnecessarily rude. But here's the thing, I wasn't rude the first time. I made polite conversation when he approached me outside. I wasn't rude the second time when I acknowledged him but kept my boundaries. This was the third time he'd tried to force an interaction when I was clearly not interested. He kept coming back even after I'd given every possible signal that I didn't want to chat. Headphones in, avoiding eye contact, ignoring his fist bumps. How much clearer could I be? After my workout, I was changing in the locker room when I overheard him talking to another guy. He was complaining that some people were just unfriendly and that he was just trying to be nice to me, but I had totally shut him down. The other guy suggested maybe I was having a bad day, but he insisted this was the third time I'd been cold to him and complained that some women think they're too good to talk to regular guys. He was actually painting me as the villain because I didn't want to be his gym buddy. I finished getting dressed and left without saying anything, but I was fuming. The next day I was telling my co-worker about it and she suggested I talk to the gym staff. I was hesitant because I didn't want to make it a bigger deal than it was, but she pointed out that if he wasn't respecting my clear boundaries, he probably wasn't respecting other people's either. So I talked to the gym manager, a really cool woman in her 50s who's worked there for years. I explained the situation and she immediately understood. She told me they actually had a policy about this kind of thing. She explained that the gym was supposed to be a comfortable space for everyone, and repeatedly bothering someone who's clearly not interested counts as harassment. She pulled up the guy's membership information, and it turns out there had been 2 other complaints about him in the past month, both from women who said he wouldn't leave them alone during their workouts. The manager said she was going to have a conversation with him that day and told me to let her know immediately if it happened again. That evening, I saw him get pulled aside by the manager right when I was starting my workout. I couldn't hear what was said, but his face went through several different expressions: confusion, anger, then what looked like understanding. For the next week, he completely avoided me. No attempts at conversation, no fist bumps, not even eye contact. It was perfect. But then yesterday I was doing squats when I noticed he was hovering nearby, clearly wanting to say something. When I finished my set, he approached me again. He told me he thought there was a misunderstanding and that he was just trying to be friendly. He suggested that maybe we had gotten off on the wrong foot. He was still trying. I told him there was no misunderstanding and reminded him that I had already said I didn't want to talk. I mentioned that the gym staff had told him the same thing and asked him to leave me alone. He got defensive and called me a princess, saying he was just a guy trying to make friends at the gym. That's when I lost it. I told him loudly that I was just a woman trying to work out without being bothered. I pointed out that he had been told multiple times to stop and called his behavior harassment. I said it loud enough that several people nearby turned to look. He got embarrassed and walked away quickly. This morning, the gym manager pulled me aside to let me know that his membership had been terminated. After our conversation yesterday, he went to the front desk to complain about me, but ended up digging himself deeper by admitting that he'd continued trying to talk to me even after being warned. The manager told me he had actually said that women at gyms should expect men to talk to them, which pretty much sealed the deal for the gym's decision to remove him. My son had been having stomach problems for months. He's only 12, and watching him double over in pain during what should have been normal kid activities was heartbreaking. After weeks of tests and doctor visits, they finally figured out he needed his appendix removed. It wasn't an emergency situation, but it had to be done. The surgery was scheduled for early morning on a Tuesday. I took time off work, which wasn't easy since I'm a single parent, and my boss isn't exactly understanding about family emergencies. My ex hasn't been in the picture for years, so it was just me handling everything. I've been stressed about the surgery for weeks, barely sleeping, making sure all the paperwork was done and that my son wasn't too scared. The operation went fine, thank God. The surgeon said everything looked good and that my boy would need to stay overnight for observation. He was still pretty groggy from the anesthesia when they moved him to his room on the pediatric floor. The nurse told me he'd probably sleep for a few hours and suggested I should try to get some food and maybe rest a little myself. I've been sitting in that uncomfortable hospital chair for about 6 hours straight, and I was running on nothing but coffee and worry. My stomach was growling loud enough to wake the dead, so I finally decided to go down to the cafeteria to grab something quick. My son was sound asleep, and the nurses said they'd keep an eye on him. I figured I'd be gone maybe 20 minutes tops. The cafeteria food was exactly what you'd expect from a hospital, but I was too hungry to care. I wolfed down a sandwich and some chips, then grabbed another coffee for the road. I was actually feeling a little better, thinking about how well the surgery had gone and how my son would be home in a day or two. That good feeling lasted exactly until I opened the door to his room. There was some woman I'd never seen before lying flat on her back in my son's hospital bed. And my son, my 12-year-old, who just had surgery a few hours ago, was slumped over in the visitor's chair looking completely uncomfortable and still half asleep from the medication. I stood there for maybe 2 seconds trying to process what I was seeing. This woman had somehow moved my unconscious child out of his own hospital bed so she could take a nap. I demanded to know what the hell she was doing in my son's bed. The woman opened her eyes and looked at me like I was the one who didn't belong there. She told me I must be his mom and said not to worry because he was fine. She explained that she just needed to rest her back for a few minutes because she'd been there all day with her patient, and these chairs were terrible for your spine. I asked her if she was saying she moved my son who just had surgery so she could lie down. She looked at me like I was being unreasonable and said he was sleeping anyway. She claimed kids can sleep anywhere, but she had a real back problem and needed a proper place to lie down for just a little while. I rushed over to check on my son, who was starting to wake up and looking confused and uncomfortable. I asked my son if he was okay and how he got in the chair. My son was still pretty out of it from the pain medication, but he managed to mumble something about a nurse moving him. Except this woman clearly wasn't a nurse. She was wearing regular clothes and didn't have any hospital identification. I told her to get out of my son's bed right now and said she had no right to be in here, let alone moving a patient who just had surgery. She said she wasn't hurting anything and that my son was fine. She said she just needed a few more minutes to rest her back. She actually rolled over like she was going to ignore me and keep lying there. I was beyond furious at this point. I warned her to get out now or I'd call security. She said there was no need to be so dramatic and claimed she was a healthcare worker too. She said she knew what she was doing and that my son wasn't using the bed anyway. That's when I lost it completely. I pressed the call button for the nurse and started yelling for someone to get in there right away. I shouted that there was a stranger in my son's bed who had moved him after his surgery. A nurse came running in, took one look at the situation, and her face went white. The nurse told the woman she couldn't be in a patient's bed and asked who she was. The entitled woman explained she was there with her patient in room 314 and just needed to rest for a few minutes because her back was killing her. She said the whole situation was completely unreasonable. The nurse asked if she had moved a post-surgical patient out of his bed without authorization. The woman said he was asleep and fine and that everyone was being way too dramatic about this. The nurse immediately called for security while I helped my son get back into his bed properly. He was starting to hurt because he'd been in an awkward position in that chair. I demanded that the police be called. I told them this woman had entered my son's room without permission and moved a patient who just had surgery. I said this was completely unacceptable. The entitled woman asked if I was serious about calling the police. She kept saying she was a healthcare professional who was just resting her back. She claimed my son was perfectly fine. Security showed up first, followed by a supervisor. The woman kept saying she worked at the hospital and had every right to use an empty bed, even though it clearly wasn't empty and she had no business being in the pediatric ward anyway. The supervisor asked for her employee ID number. She said she didn't have it with her, but explained she was there with her patient. She claimed she'd been working all day and just needed to rest. The supervisor told her she wasn't employed by the hospital because security had checked. He said she was there as a private caregiver for a patient in another room. That's when the woman's story started falling apart. Turns out she wasn't even a licensed nurse, just someone hired by a family to sit with their elderly relative. She had no medical training and definitely no right to be moving patients around. The police did show up, and the woman was arrested for trespassing and endangering a patient. She kept screaming about how unfair it all was and how she just needed to rest her back. The officers weren't buying it. She complained that it was ridiculous because she didn't hurt anyone and was just lying down for a few minutes. The police officer explained that she had moved a child who just had surgery without any medical authority to do so. He told her that was patient endangerment. She protested that she worked in healthcare and knew what she was doing. The officer pointed out that she wasn't licensed and didn't work for the hospital. He said she needed to come with them. They led her out in handcuffs while she was still complaining about her back pain and how everyone was overreacting. The hospital staff apologized over and over. They moved us to a different room and made sure my son was comfortable. The supervisor said they were reviewing their security procedures to make sure something like this couldn't happen again. My son was okay, thankfully. He was sore from being in that chair, but the doctor checked him over and said no real damage was done. He slept much better once we got him settled in the new room. I later found out that the woman was charged with trespassing, patient endangerment, and interfering with medical care. The family she was supposed to be caring for fired her immediately when they found out what happened. I'm a junior at a pretty expensive state university, and finding affordable housing near campus is basically impossible. My parents help where they can, but they're not exactly rolling in money, so I work 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore just to make ends meet. When I found this two-bedroom apartment that was actually within my budget, I jumped on it. The only catch was that I needed a roommate to split the costs. That's where she came in. Let's call her Karen because, well, you'll see why. She responded to my posting on the university housing board, and during our coffee meeting she seemed reasonable. She was a senior, had good references from previous roommates, and could pay her half of the rent on time. We signed the lease together, both our names on it, splitting everything 50-50 down the middle. Rent, utilities, internet, even the security deposit. I thought I'd found the perfect roommate. The problem started almost immediately after we moved in. The very first week I came home from my evening shift at the bookstore to find Karen lounging on the couch, eating the leftover pizza I'd saved for dinner. I asked her about eating my pizza from the night before. She shrugged it off, saying she was hungry and figured I wouldn't mind sharing. Then she hit me with a line that would become her signature phrase over the next few months. She told me I was lucky she tolerated me living there anyway. I was confused if we both signed the lease, if we both pay equal rent, but I let it slide thinking maybe she was just having a bad day or joking around. Big mistake. Over the next few months, this became her go-to phrase for everything. If I asked her to do her dishes, she'd roll her eyes and remind me how lucky I was that she tolerated me. If I mentioned that her music was too loud when I was studying, same response. When I asked her to please not bring random guys over on weeknights because I had early classes, she'd act like I was asking for the world. She called me way too uptight and reminded me once again that I was lucky she tolerated me being such a buzzkill. She'd eat my food constantly. I'm talking about groceries I'd specifically bought for myself, labeled containers in the fridge, even my coffee creamer. When I confronted her about it, she'd always have the same response. She'd wave me off, saying it was just food and I shouldn't be so selfish. Then came the familiar refrain about how lucky I was that she tolerated me and didn't ask me to move out. This went on for months. I started keeping my food in a mini fridge in my room, which was ridiculous since we had a perfectly good kitchen. I tiptoe around the apartment, afraid to ask for basic respect or consideration. My grades started suffering because I couldn't study properly with her constant parties and loud phone calls. I was working extra shifts just to replace the food she'd eat, which meant even less time for schoolwork. My friends kept telling me to stand up to her or find a new place, but it wasn't that simple. The lease didn't end until May, and breaking it would cost me more money than I had. Plus, good affordable housing near campus was impossible to find mid-semester. I felt trapped. The breaking point came during finals week in December. I've been studying for my organic chemistry exam for weeks. This test was worth 40% of my grade, and I needed at least a B plus to keep my scholarship. I've been surviving on 3 hours of sleep and coffee, pulling all-nighters in the library because Karen had been throwing parties every other night. That Tuesday morning, I dragged myself home at 6 in the morning after studying all night. I had my exam at 2 in the afternoon, so I planned to grab a quick nap and review my notes one more time. When I walked in, I saw Karen stumbling through the front door, clearly coming home from wherever she'd spent the night. She spotted me and said she was glad I was there because she needed a huge favor. I asked her what was up. She explained that she might have overslept and missed Professor Johnson's class yesterday. Again. She said today was the last day to submit their final projects, but she hadn't even started hers yet. She wanted me to email him pretending to be her, saying she was super sick with food poisoning or something, and ask for an extension. I stared at her. She wanted me to help her cheat and lie to a professor after months of treating me like garbage in my own home. I told her I couldn't do that because it was academic dishonesty and I wasn't comfortable lying to a professor for her. She tried to convince me not to be such a goody two-shoes, insisting it wasn't a big deal and I should just send one little email. Then she delivered her favorite line about how lucky I was that she tolerated me living there, so the least I could do was help her out when she needed it. There it was again. That phrase that had been eating away at me for months. Something inside me just snapped. All the stolen food, all the sleepless nights, all the times I bitten my tongue and taken her abuse, it all came rushing back. I looked her straight in the eye and said the most satisfying thing I'd said all semester. I told her that she was lucky I tolerated her. Her mouth dropped open. She clearly wasn't expecting me to throw her own words back at her. She demanded to know what I had just said to her. I repeated that she heard me correctly. I told her she was lucky I tolerated her, and that I was done tolerating this. I said she could find someone else to help her cheat. I walked into my room, slammed the door, and turned my music up as loud as it would go. I could hear her banging on my door, yelling about how I was being unreasonable and selfish, but I just put my headphones on and finally got that nap I desperately needed. Later that evening after my exam, I found out through a mutual friend that Professor Johnson hadn't given Karen an extension. She'd failed the project, which meant she failed the class. Since it was a required course for her major, she had to stay an extra semester to retake it, which cost her thousands in additional tuition and delayed her graduation. She never used that stupid phrase on me again. In fact, she barely spoke to me for the rest of the lease. She moved out the day after finals ended, leaving me to enjoy a peaceful spring semester with a new roommate who actually respected me and our shared space. I started at a big box store making minimum wage, then moved to a department store that paid a little better. When I saw the job posting for a luxury watch store at the mall, I jumped at it. The pay was decent, the commission was good, and honestly, it felt pretty nice working somewhere that sold things worth more than my monthly rent. The store was small but elegant. We sold watches that cost anywhere from $500 to $50,000. I learned everything I could about the different brands, the movements, the materials. My manager was this older guy who'd been in the watch business for 20 years. He was fair and understood that retail could be unpredictable. Our store hours were 10 in the morning until 9 at night. Most days, the real customer traffic died down around 7:30 or 8. The mall would get quieter, and we'd maybe see one or two people browse before closing time. My manager taught me that we should use the slow periods wisely. We'd clean the display cases, count the registers, vacuum the small carpeted area, and organize the back room. By 8:40 most nights, everything was done and we'd just sit and chat quietly while keeping an eye out for any last-minute customers. It worked perfectly. We stayed professional, the store always looked spotless, and we never had to rush through closing procedures. If someone came in at 8:55, we could help them properly because all our closing tasks were already handled. Then one Tuesday evening, everything changed. I was wiping down the last display case when this guy in an expensive suit walked in. It was about 8:45 and I assumed he was a customer looking at the high-end pieces. My manager was behind the counter updating some paperwork. My manager greeted him politely and asked if he could help him find anything. The man looked around the store with this weird expression like he was inspecting everything. Then he looked at us and announced that he was actually our regional manager who was in the area and decided to stop by unannounced. My stomach dropped. I'd never met the regional manager before, but I'd heard he could be intense. My manager immediately straightened up and tried to make a good impression, mentioning that the store had been doing well with sales up 12% from last quarter. The regional manager responded sarcastically that he could see we were both working really hard. He said it while looking directly at me sitting on the small stool behind the counter. I'd literally just finished cleaning, but I guess it looked like I was just hanging around. He asked what time we closed and my manager told him 9 o'clock. When he asked what time it was now, my manager said about 8:45. Then the regional manager got annoyed and asked why we were sitting around chatting when we still had 15 minutes of work time left. My manager tried to explain our system, how we did all the closing tasks early so we could focus on customers if they came in. But the regional manager wasn't having it. He said he didn't want to see employees sitting around on company time, and that we were being paid to work until 9, not until 8:45. My manager explained that we'd actually finished all our closing duties, and that the registers were balanced, displays were clean, and everything was organized. The regional manager told him to find something else to do then, like clean something twice or organize the back room again. He said he didn't care what we did, but he better not hear about employees sitting around doing nothing while on the clock. He left without another word. My manager and I looked at each other, both feeling pretty annoyed. We'd been doing our jobs well, the store was always perfect, and our sales numbers were good. But apparently, that didn't matter. The next morning, we got an email with a new policy. The subject line was Closing Procedures Update, and it was from the regional manager. The email was short but clear. It said that, effective immediately, no closing tasks could begin until after store hours ended at 9 p.m., and that employees must remain actively engaged in work-related activities until closing time. My manager said it was ridiculous and that we'd be there until 9:30 every night now. I asked him about our contract and whether we got overtime pay for working past our scheduled shift. He told me that we got time and a half for anything over 8 hours or past 9 p.m. I pointed out that if we couldn't start closing until 9 and it took us 30 minutes to close, we'd be getting paid overtime every single night. We looked at each other and shrugged. If that's what corporate wanted, that's what they'd get. Starting that Wednesday, we followed the new rule exactly. When 8:45 rolled around and we'd normally start our closing routine, we just stood there. We'd help any customers who came in, but otherwise we just waited. We organized things that were already organized. We cleaned things that were already clean. We basically killed time in the most professional way possible. At exactly 9 o'clock, we'd spring into action, counting registers, cleaning displays, vacuuming, organizing the back room, updating inventory systems. All the stuff we used to do gradually throughout the evening now had to happen in one rushed 30-minute period. Our paychecks started getting bigger. Time and a half for 30 minutes every night adds up quickly over a week. I mentioned to my coworker that I was making an extra $60 a week just because the regional manager didn't want to see us sitting down. My manager agreed but warned that corporate wasn't going to like these labor costs. He was right. After about 2 weeks, we started getting emails from the corporate office asking about our overtime hours. Our manager had to explain the new policy every time. He told me he'd explained to them 3 times that we were following the regional manager's exact instructions. The situation got even more absurd when customers would see us during those last 15 minutes before 9. They'd see us just standing there, clearly not busy, and ask if we could help them with something. We politely explained that we were waiting for closing time to begin our closing procedures, but we'd be happy to answer any questions about the watches. One customer seemed confused and asked if we couldn't clean a display case right then. I told him not until 9 o'clock, but offered to tell him all about the Swiss chronographs if he was interested. It was absurd, but we followed the rule perfectly. After 3 weeks of this, something interesting happened. A man in an expensive suit walked in around 8:45, but this time it wasn't the regional manager. This guy was older, carried himself differently, and when he introduced himself as someone from the corporate office, I understood why. He said he wanted to see this overtime situation for himself. He stood there and watched us do absolutely nothing for 15 minutes. We straightened already straight displays. We dusted already clean surfaces. We stood behind the counter looking professional, but completely unproductive. At exactly 9 o'clock, we transformed into a closing machine. The senior executive watched us rush through 30 minutes of actual work, staying until 9:30. He commented that the whole thing seemed inefficient. My manager told him we were following the regional manager's policy exactly as written. The executive said he could see that. The next day we got another email. This one was from corporate headquarters. It said that effective immediately, store employees should use their professional judgment regarding closing procedures, and that stores should maintain excellent customer service and appearance standards until closing time, with closing tasks completed as efficiently as possible. Just like that, we were back to our old system. Close early, sit quietly, help any late customers properly, and go home at 9 on the dot. The regional manager never visited our store again during my time there, and our overtime pay went back to zero, but honestly, having our evenings back was worth it. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.